One Thanksgiving mistake. 260 tons of unsold turkey. And an idea that changed how America ate for decades. It began, as so many things that alter the course of ordinary life begin, not with genius, but with panic. Not in a test kitchen with white-coated food scientists and clipboards, not in a boardroom where executives weighed the future of American eating with charts and projections, but in a cold storage facility in Omaha, Nebraska. In the autumn of 1953, where a company called CA Swanson & Sons found itself staring at a problem so enormous and so expensive that something radical had to be done. They had miscalculated. What is fair? They had ordered turkey, an extraordinary amount of turkey, anticipating a Thanksgiving demand that did not materialize the way they had expected. And now the turkey was sitting in refrigerated railroad cars, 260 tons of it, trundling back and forth across the country to stay cold because Swanson had run out of warehouse space and the clock was ticking on every pound. Something had to be done. Not next week. Now, the man who saw the opportunity where others saw only catastrophe was not, as it happened, a chef. He was not a homemaker who understood the pressures of a 1950s kitchen. He was a salesman, sharp, practical, and capable of looking at 260 tons of frozen turkey and seeing not a disaster but a raw material. His name was Jerry Thomas, and he worked for Swanson. And when he came back from a sales trip and heard about the turkey problem, he reportedly sketched an idea on a napkin. Or perhaps he refined an idea that was already circulating in various forms. The precise origin has been debated for decades, and Swanson's own records tell a slightly different story involving the brothers themselves and their development team. But what is certain is this. Someone looked at all that turkey, looked at the aluminum section trays that airline companies were already using to serve meals in flight, looked at the television sets that were now sitting in the living rooms of nearly half of American homes, and understood that these three things, the surplus, the tray, the television, could be combined into something the American household had never seen. The very first TV dinner was nearly discarded before a single customer ever saw it. We'll get to why. But first, picture the year. 1953. The Korean War had just ended. Eisenhower was in the White House. The economy was expanding outward in every direction. Into the suburbs, into the new ranch houses, with their pastel kitchens and their attached garages and their backyards, where children were supposed to grow up safe and sunny. Into the shopping centers that were replacing the downtown stores. Into the garages that held the two-tone Chevrolets and Fords that represented a new kind of American freedom. The freedom of the road, of the suburb, of the detached house with its fresh paint and its picture window looking out on a street of houses exactly like it. The war was over. The men had come home. The babies had been born, millions of them, the great demographic wave that was already changing everything it touched. The economy was producing, and the consumer was consuming, and America was, by every available measure, a country in motion, moving forward into a future it could not entirely describe, but was entirely confident about. And in the living rooms of those ranch houses and Cape Cods and split levels were being carried in from the delivery truck and installed with great ceremony. Positioned in the corner that had been cleared for it, and arranged around with furniture that turned to face it, was the television set. Not every family had one yet, Television ownership was around 40% of American households in 1953, a number that would reach nearly 90% by 1960. But the ones that didn't were acutely aware of the ones that did. The children knew which neighbors had the set. The adults knew which evenings were worth a visit. Television was the future, and everyone knew it. And the future was already here in the living room. Its screen glowing with test patterns, and Ed Sullivan, and Sid Caesar, and Dragnet, and the first evening news broadcasts that were changing the way America understood itself in real time. The television changed the living room. This sounds obvious now, but in 1953, it was still a live experiment, a social shift happening in real time in millions of American homes. The furniture rearranged itself around the set. The chairs turned to face it. And the question of what to do at dinner time, because the evening programs began at a time that coincided precisely with the American dinner hour, was a question that had not been fully answered. Some families ate quickly in the kitchen and moved to the living room. Some families ate at the kitchen table with the radio on, as they always had, and ignored the television. And some families, more and more of them as the decade progressed, began to carry their plates to the living room and eat in front of the screen, because the screen was more interesting than the wall. And the evening program had already started, and nobody wanted to miss it. The TV tray appeared in this gap. Balrog, too, appeared in this gap. Those small folding tables, metal legs that unfolded with a click, a flat surface just large enough for a plate and a glass, printed with a floral pattern or a wood grain finish or a simple geometric design in the colors of the era. Dusty rose and sage green, and the particular gold brown of 1950s domestic decoration. Those trays were already in some homes before the TV dinner arrived, already being used to hold the plates carried from the kitchen table to the living room floor. They were practical. They were slightly apologetic. They were a concession to a new habit that hadn't yet been given permission to be a full habit. The TV tray was itself a remarkable piece of mid-century design that no one has ever quite given credit for as design. Its genius was its portability, the way it could be set up in seconds and folded away in seconds, present for the meal and absent afterward, leaving the living room unmarked by the fact of eating. It had its own storage position, leaning against the wall behind a door or tucked in a narrow closet, a folded metal form that seemed to barely exist until it was needed. When a family set of 4 matching TV trays was purchased, and sets of 4 were the common purchase, one for each family member, they often came with their own wheeled racko, a little cart of convenience that sat in the corner of the dining room or the hallway and held the folded trays upright, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. The rack and its trays were a piece of furniture that announced something about the household's habits, a domestic object whose presence signified an entire way of organizing an evening. The TV dinner gave it permission. When Swanson launched the product in the fall of 1953, priced at 98 cents, packaged in a cardboard box, printed with the image of a television set, complete with rabbit ears. The meal inside a divided aluminum tray that was itself a kind of miniature television screen for food. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Swanson had expected to sell perhaps 5,000 units in the first year. They sold 10 million. 10 million. Tortilla. Kisserund. Korstalkuri. 10 million. Tart. Wall. The number needs a moment. Not because it is dramatic, though it is dramatic, but because of what it means. 10 million families in the space of a single year, opened a cardboard box, slid an aluminum tray into their oven, set a timer, and waited for dinner to arrive without anyone having cooked it. 10 million families discovered that the promise on the box, a complete meal, hot, in 25 minutes, no preparation required, was more or less true. Not transcendent. Not the equal of a home-cooked meal, but real food, hot, on a tray, ready in less time than it took to peel a potato. Do you remember the first time one of these appeared in your home? The box was a piece of design that deserves its own consideration, because it was not merely packaging, it was argument. The image of the television set on the front was not accidental. It was a message. It was Swanson telling the American consumer that this food, this new kind of food, belonged to the television age. That eating it was not a compromise, but a participation in modernity. Box showed the meal as it was meant to look. The turkey sliced generous and golden, the dressing perfectly formed, the peas bright green, the sweet potato burnished and glowing, and the box made implicit promises about the inside that the inside, being honest, could not always entirely keep. You probably remember the exact shape of that tray. 3 compartments in the original. The large one on the left for the turkey and gravy, the one beside it for the cornbread dressing, and the 2 smaller squares at the right end, one for the peas, one for the sweet potato. The divisions were clean and definitive. The food in each compartment stayed in its compartment, which was itself a kind of culinary statement. The components of this meal are separate and equal, and will not be asked to mingle. The turkey's gravy might pool slightly at the edge of its section and find its way toward the dressing, and this was either pleasant or objectionable depending entirely on the eater's preferences. But the peas and the sweet potato were always safely in their own territories, never touching unless you deliberately introduced them, which most people did not. The aluminum tray was light, lighter than a dinner plate. When you picked it up with a pot holder, because the oven made it genuinely hot, hot enough to burn an unprotected hand, it had a particular feel, a combination of that lightness and the rigidity of the formed metal, and the heat radiating through the pot holder into your palm. And when you carried it from the kitchen to the living room and set it on the TV tray, the folding table clicking open with its characteristic sound, the surface steady, the metal legs slightly uneven on the carpet so that the whole apparatus tilted very slightly forward or back. There was a ritual in this. It was new, and it was modern, and it was slightly strange. This combination of the hot tray and the folding table and the glowing screen. But rituals don't have to be old to feel like rituals. They just have to happen enough times in the same way. The foil cover peeled back with a specific sound and a specific resistance. A crinkle and a give, the steam releasing all at once from beneath it, a hot breath of turkey and gravy, and something faintly metallic, and then the meal was visible. And this was the moment. The moment between the image on the box and the reality on the tray. The moment that every TV dinner consumer navigated in their own way. Some accepting the reality cheerfully. Some feeling the faint specific disappointment of a thing that almost resembles its own advertisement. And some, particularly the children, simply not caring at all because the peas were green and the potato was sweet and the television was on and dinner was here. The man who almost caused the very first TV dinner to never reach a store shelf was, in a sense, a quality control manager with an instinct for the right thing at the wrong time. When early versions of the product came out of the development phase, someone at Swanson raised the legitimate concern that the meal, however convenient, however novel, was not good enough. The turkey was sometimes dry. The dressing could turn gummy at the edges where it touched the aluminum. The peas went soft in ways that bordered on unacceptable. And the debate within the company about whether to launch anyway, whether the convenience would outweigh the culinary shortcomings, was a real debate, and the people who had it were not wrong. They were simply overruled by the arithmetic of 10 million unsold pounds of turkey. It started as a solution to a problem. It ended as something else entirely. The something else took a few years to fully reveal itself. In 1953 and 1954, the TV dinner was a novelty, a curiosity, a thing families tried and discussed, and either embraced or set aside. The early adopters were households where both spouses worked, where the evening cooking burden fell heavily on a woman who had also spent 8 hours at an office, where the notion of a complete hot dinner appearing in 25 minutes without any labor other than the opening of an oven was not a cultural statement, but a practical salvation. There were households where something had to give, and the TV dinner was something that could give without entirely surrendering the idea of a cooked meal. But the marketing told a different story. Swanson's advertising of the mid-1950s was pointed at a very specific image of American womanhood, not the working wife who needed relief, but the modern, aspirational homemaker who wanted to participate in the television age without being chained to the kitchen when the programs were starting. The magazine advertisements in Good Housekeeping and Ladies' Home Journal showed smiling women in good clothes, carrying TV trays, to living rooms where husbands and children sat in comfortable chairs, everyone together, everyone happy. The television providing the unifying backdrop for a family scene that looked reassuringly like a family dinner just relocated from the kitchen to the living room. The language of these advertisements was precise in a way that deserves attention. A complete meal in minutes. Not a quick meal or an easy meal, but a complete meal. The word complete doing enormous work, carrying the assurance that nothing essential had been sacrificed, that the 4 food groups were present, and the family's nutritional obligations were met, and the evening could proceed without guilt. Complete was the word that addressed the anxiety directly. The anxiety was, is this a real dinner? And the word complete answered, yes. Absolutely yes. Everything a meal should be, right there in the aluminum compartments. The television commercials of the era added a visual dimension to this reassurance. A housewife, always young, always cheerful, always wearing an apron that seemed to exist for decorative rather than functional purposes, would open the oven, remove the tray with a folded cloth or pot holder, carry it to the living room where the family was waiting, and the family's faces would register something between satisfaction and delight. The children were well behaved. The husband was appreciative. The television in the background was showing something pleasant. The entire scene communicated a specific, aspirational message. This is what a modern family looks like, and they are happy. And they are happy partly because dinner was easy. The relocation was the key sleight of hand. The ads never said the family was eating separately. They never said the kitchen table was being abandoned. They showed togetherness, just slightly rearranged. The family circle maintained, simply repositioned around a screen instead of around a table. It was a careful, intelligent piece of marketing that understood the anxiety it was navigating. American families of the 1950s understood, however implicitly, that the dinner table was a moral object. It was where families were families. To abandon it entirely was not a thing you admitted. But to temporarily, cheerfully, modernly relocate the family meal to the living room on a special evening for a special program, that was something else. That was being with the times. Did your family still eat together at the table, or did the TV tray slowly take over? The Swanson brothers, Gilbert and Clark, who had inherited the company from their father, understood that they had created something that needed to evolve. The original meal, good enough and no better, would satisfy curiosity but not loyalty. Loyalty required variety. And through the late 1950s and into the 1960s, variety arrived with a regularity that kept the category expanding even as the initial novelty wore off. Fried chicken appeared. And this was a significant moment, because fried chicken translated to the aluminum tray in a way that turkey did not quite manage. The skin, even reheated, retained some of its character. The meat was moist. The portion felt generous in a way the turkey slice sometimes didn't. Fried chicken in a Swanson tray with mashed potatoes and corn was a legitimately good frozen meal by the standards of the era, and it sold accordingly. Salisbury steak came next, and then meatloaf, and then macaroni and cheese. And then, in a moment of marketing genius that would define the relationship between television and children for the next several decades, the specifically child-oriented meals. Lonson Children's line of the early 1960s understood that children were not incidental consumers of the TV dinner, but central ones. A child who loved their Swanson chicken dinner was a child who asked for it, who influenced the shopping cart, who created a domestic demand that the parents then had to meet. The targeting of children by food companies was not invented by Swanson. But Swanson's contribution to it was the aluminum tray on the TV table in front of the Saturday morning cartoons. A combination so natural and so pleasurable that it created a memory in a generation of children that has never fully faded. Michelle? Enrico, her, also there. How do you, Juan? You probably remember exactly which compartment you ate first. The ritual of the compartment was a small but genuine pleasure, and it was one that children in particular took seriously. The TV dinner offered something that the family meal at the kitchen table did not: a degree of individual sovereignty over the eating experience. At the kitchen table, the food came from shared serving dishes and was distributed by a parent, and the portions were what they were, and the sequence of eating was governed by the social rules of the table. At the TV tray, the food was yours, and yours alone from the moment the foil came back, and the order in which you addressed it was entirely your own decision, and this autonomy, small as it was, contained as it was within an aluminum tray the size of a book, had a specific remembered pleasure that many people of the TV dinner generation can still articulate 60 years later. The peas, for many children, were last. Not because they were disliked. They were acceptable, soft as they were, but because the correct procedure, self-evidently, was to eat the best things first and save the less urgent things for last. And the peas were less urgent than the chicken, or the turkey, or the Salisbury steak with its particular gravy that was quite different from any gravy a mother made but was entirely its own thing, pleasantly uniform. The same every time, pleasantly uniform. A flavor that became familiar enough to be comforting in its predictability. The sweet potato was also frequently last. The sweet potato in the original TV dinner was genuinely good, sweetened and smooth, a comfort food miniaturized into one small square, and yet it occupied the position of afterthought in the tray's geography, and children treated it accordingly. The four-compartment tray arrived in the early 1960s, and the fourth compartment was given to something that the original Swanson tray had not dared to include: dessert. A small square of apple or cherry cobbler. A section of brownies. A component of sweetness that made the meal more complete, that pushed it further toward the territory of a real dinner, while remaining entirely in the territory of the aluminum tray. The four-compartment tray was a statement of ambition. It was Swanson telling the American family that the TV dinner was not a compromised version of a meal, but a full meal. That the aluminum and the foil and the 25 minutes in the oven were not a surrender of the dinner table's values, but a translation of them. No one called it a revolution at the time. The revolution was happening in the living room, slowly and without announcement. It began in the way all cultural shifts begin. At the margin, on special occasions with specific justifications that made it feel exceptional rather than transformative. A big game on a Friday evening. A particularly important episode of a favorite show. A night when the cooking simply hadn't happened, and the tray was there as a rescue. And then, because the exceptional becomes habitual with enough repetition, it happened more. And more. And the justifications became lighter, less specific, until they disappeared entirely, and the TV tray in front of the television was simply what dinner was on a Tuesday. Picture the living room of 1963. The television set, a large console model now, a piece of furniture in itself, housed in walnut or mahogany veneer, the screen curved and rounded at the corners, the image in black and white, the sound coming from a speaker behind a fabric grill at the bottom. The evening news was on. Huntley Brinkley, or Walter Cronkite, or a local anchor whose name was as familiar as a neighbor's. The lamp in the corner making a warm pool of light. The vinyl footstool. The sofa, practical and slightly itchy in summer. The room had arranged itself around the television in the way that rooms always arrange themselves, around their most compelling object. The chairs faced it. The sofa was angled toward it. Even the coffee table had migrated to a position that was useful for placing a glass or a book without blocking the sightline. The room had been a room designed for conversation, for the family to sit facing each other and talk, which is what living rooms had been for, and it had become, quietly and without formal announcement, a theater. A small domestic theater with a single screen and comfortable seating and a program that changed by the hour. You bought a ticket to this theater by living in the house, and the programming was determined by the networks, and the evening schedule was as fixed and anticipated as any other appointment in the family calendar. 8 o'clock, the Beverly Hillbillies. 8:30, the Dick Van Dyke Show. These were not incidental entertainments. They were events, expected and prepared for. The organizing logic of the evening around which everything else, including dinner, arranged itself. And in front of each person, balanced on its folding metal legs, the TV tray. The floral one, or the wood grain one, or the one with the abstract geometric pattern that had seemed very modern when it was purchased at the department store. The aluminum tray on top of the TV tray, the foil already peeled back and crumpled to the side, the steam already gone, the food at that particular temperature, that is below hot but above cold. The exact temperature of a meal that has been waiting a few minutes while you arranged yourself and opened your napkin and found the remote control, which was still a novelty in some households and still required getting up from the sofa in others. The fork was a regular fork, not a miniature one, though the scale of the tray made it feel slightly large. You navigated the compartments with it, working across the tray with a logic that was your own. The chicken first, or the meatloaf, or the turkey. If this was the original meal, and the gravy that had pooled in the corner of the largest compartment offered itself as a condiment to everything adjacent. The television talk. The laugh track of a sitcom filled the room where conversation would have been, providing a social warmth that was not quite the same as actual conversation, but was not nothing. Was in fact quite effective at making a room of separate people eating from individual trays feel almost like a gathering. Almost. The mother who had spent the hour before dinner not in the kitchen was where exactly? On the sofa with her own tray. Or in the kitchen for those 25 minutes doing other things. The laundry, the phone call, the reading she never had time for when dinner required an hour of preparation. The TV dinner gave her time back. This is real, and it deserves acknowledgement. The labor of the 1950s and 1960s, American household fell entirely and without question onto the woman inside it, and that labor was enormous. Cooking, cleaning, managing, organizing, maintaining, and any technology that reduced any part of it was, from a purely practical standpoint, a gift. A 25-minute dinner is a genuine liberation, if the alternative is an hour of preparation after a full day of everything else. But there is always a but in these stories, and this one is not the but of judgment, not the implication that women should have stayed in the kitchen, which would be a grotesque conclusion to draw from the evidence, but the but of complexity, the but that acknowledges that the things we gain and the things we lose are often the same things, only looked at from different angles. The dinner table, in the family life of mid-century America, was not merely the place where food was eaten. It was the place where the family assembled. It was the daily appointment that had no other function than to put the members of a household in the same room, at the same time, facing each other, with no particular agenda, except to eat and to be together. Children reported on their school days. Fathers reported on their work. Mothers held the conversation together and directed it and modulated it and made it safe and productive and occasionally interesting. Arguments happened at the dinner table and were sometimes resolved there. Plans were made. News was shared. Silence happened too. The comfortable silence of people who know each other well enough not to fill every moment. A silence that is entirely different from the silence of separate people watching the same screen. The kitchen table was also the place where the preparation of the meal happened before the meal, where vegetables were cleaned and cut, where the smell of cooking built and intensified, where children sometimes helped and sometimes hindered and were present either way in the domestic process of food becoming dinner. This proximity to the making of food was not accidental and was not trivial. A child who watched their mother flour the chicken cutlets, who sat at the table doing homework in a kitchen that smelled of browning butter, who was handed a carrot to eat while the stew finished. That child had a relationship with food, and with the labor of food that was embodied and specific and unlearnable from any other source. The kitchen table was a classroom, and the classroom was incidental, and the learning was permanent. The TV dinner did not take the children out of the kitchen immediately or completely, but it began to make the kitchen a place of shorter occupation, a utility rather than a gathering room, a space you entered to perform a specific function and left when the function was complete. The oven beeped. The tray came out. The kitchen was done with you for the evening. When the TV tray replaced the kitchen table, it replaced all of this. Not with nothing, with the television, which provided a common experience, a shared entertainment, a topic that the family could discuss if they chose to. But the television also provided a reason not to discuss anything else. The news is on. The show has started. We'll talk during the commercial. And sometimes they talked during the commercial, and sometimes they didn't, and the meal ended, and the trays went back to the kitchen, and the evening continued, and perhaps the conversation happened later, or perhaps it didn't. Because after dinner came more television, and by 9 o'clock the children were in bed, and the adults were still watching, and the day closed without the long, gathering talk of a family that had sat facing each other over food and had time and reason to speak. This did not happen in every household. There are families who ate TV dinners on Friday nights as a treat, and ate at the kitchen table every other night of their lives. There are families who set up the TV trays in front of the set and talked throughout the meal, the television a background presence rather than the central one. The story of the TV dinner is not a simple decline narrative, not a fable about convenience leading inexorably to disconnection. Human beings are more complicated than that, and families are more complicated than that. But the trend was real. The data on family dinner frequency showed a consistent, gradual decline across the 1960s. And the decline correlates, not coincidentally, with the rise of the frozen food industry and the increasing presence of the television in the American home. The two technologies work together. They were designed for each other, almost literally, in the case of Swanson's packaging, and their combined effect on the evening ritual of the American family was not dramatic or sudden, but slow and accumulative, the way rivers change their courses, not in a flood, but in a million small redirections over time. Do you remember the first TV dinner you ever ate, and whether it felt like a treat or a strange new thing? The children of the 1950s and 1960s, who grew up eating TV dinners, remember them with a specific, complex fondness that is not quite nostalgia and not quite something else. The fondness is real. The memory of the aluminum tray, the particular warmth of it, the peeling back of the foil, the compartments with their specific contents, the TV tray clicking open in the living room, all of it has the quality of a memory that was repeated enough times to become part of the body's knowledge rather than the mind's. But the complexity comes from understanding, in retrospect, what the TV dinner was and what it represented, and from carrying, somewhere underneath the fondness, the awareness that something was being quietly traded. The tray itself was designed to be thrown away. This was part of its modernity, its convenience, its appeal. You ate from it and discarded it. No washing up, no soaking, no stack of dishes drying in the rack beside the sink. The aluminum went in the trash, and the meal was over, and the evening continued without the domestic coda of the kitchen cleanup that had always followed the family dinner. The ease of this was genuine. The symbolism of it was something that probably wasn't considered in 1953 and is only visible from the vantage point of 7 decades later. A meal that was meant to be thrown away. Not the food. The food was real, however modest its ambitions. But the vessel. The aluminum tray with its 3, and then 4, compartments, designed to be used once and discarded, which was itself a statement about what kind of meal this was, about its relationship with permanence and ritual, and the kind of careful daily investment that the kitchen table had represented. You don't throw away your grandmother's serving dishes. You don't discard the casserole pan after each use. The objects of a real meal have weight and history, and they wash and return and wait for the next occasion. And their repetition in the kitchen cabinet is a record of every meal they have served, every gathering they have attended, every occasion they have marked. The cast-iron skillet that cooked 1,000 breakfasts, the serving platter that appeared at every holiday, the soup tureen that came out in winter. These are objects with accumulated meaning, objects that carry the memory of their use and their material. The aluminum tray had none of this. It was of the moment, for the moment, and then it was gone. It could not be inherited. It could not be pointed to in a cabinet and told about. It had no history and would leave no trace. The meal it served was real. The vessel that served it was disposable. And the combination of a real meal in a disposable vessel was a new kind of thing in the world, a category that had not existed before 1953 and would expand in the decades that followed to encompass an enormous portion of what Americans ate and how they thought about eating. The irony is that the aluminum tray survived anyway, not in the trash, but in memory, in the specific, vivid, embodied memory of a generation for whom the TV dinner was a fixture of childhood. The weight of the tray through the pot holder, the crinkle of the foil, the steam, the compartments, the peas, and in the museums and cultural histories that now treat this 98-cent product as an artifact of enormous significance, which it was. The tray that was designed to be discarded became instead one of the most recognizable objects of the 20th century. Museum curators have retrieved it from the cultural trash where it was meant to go and placed it under glass, and visitors stand before it and feel the warmth of the aluminum through the intervening decades and say, "Yes, I remember that. I remember exactly that." Swanson's competitors saw the numbers, 10 million in the first year, then more, then dramatically more as the frozen food category expanded through the late 1950s and moved quickly. Morton's, Banquet, and others entered the market with their own versions of the divided aluminum tray and the cardboard television box and the promise of convenience. The category expanded rapidly and with a momentum that surprised even the companies driving it. The frozen food aisle of the American supermarket grew longer and colder and more populated every year, and the section devoted to complete frozen meals, the TV dinner section, in the language of everyone who shopped there, regardless of whose brand filled the shelf, became one of the most dynamic retail spaces in the store, constantly changing, expanding, offering new varieties and new formats with a regularity that kept the American shopper returning to check what was new. The grocery store itself was changing in ways that made the TV dinner success almost inevitable. The supermarket of the late 1950s was a cathedral of post-war abundance, its fluorescent aisles stocked with an inventory that would have seemed miraculous to a shopper of 20 years earlier. The frozen food section in particular was a declaration of technological optimism. Here was science in the service of the family, food preserved at its peak and available year-round, the seasons irrelevant, the supply chain invisible. The result always consistent. You bought it, you froze it, you prepared it, and the preparation was trivial. This was the promise of the post-war food industry, and the TV dinner was its most dramatic embodiment. The chest freezers that appeared in American homes in the late 1950s and early 1960s, large, efficient, humming with cold in the basement or the garage, represented a new kind of household infrastructure. A pantry of the future that could hold not just vegetables from the summer garden, but complete meals, waiting, patient, needing only 25 minutes in the oven to become dinner. The household with a chest freezer was a household that could plan a week of dinners on a Sunday, stack the trays in the white interior, and know that every evening's meal was already decided and already acquired. The management of the household's food, always a significant labor, always requiring planning and shopping and preparation, had been partially industrialized. The family was now a consumer of meals as well as a maker of them. And the television, for its part, kept growing. The sets got larger. The programming got more numerous, more varied, more engaging. The networks understood that the evening hours, particularly the dinner-adjacent hours of 6 to 8, were when the American family was most reliably assembled in front of the screen. And they programmed accordingly. The evening news at 6:30, the prime time shows beginning at 7:30, the schedule calibrated to the rhythms of the American household as precisely as a dinner party invitation. The television was not incidental to the TV dinner. It was its partner. Its partner. They rose together, and they changed together, and they changed America together. The moment the family realized they had stopped sitting at the big table came differently for each family. Sometimes it came as a question asked by a child. When do we eat in the kitchen anymore? That produced an uncomfortable adult silence. Sometimes it came when a grandparent visited and expressed, gently or not so gently, the view that eating in front of the television was not quite civilized, an opinion that the parents defended with the language of modernity and practicality, while privately wondering if the grandparent had a point. Sometimes it came when someone tried to have an important conversation about school, about money, about a family decision, and found that the television made it impossible, that the conversation kept pausing, kept deferring, kept saying, wait until the commercial, and the commercial came and went, and the next program started, and the conversation didn't resume. The unspoken sadness of a mother who no longer spent an hour on dinner was real in many households. However much it was also a relief. Cooking was labor, and labor is not sentimental, and the freedom from the daily pressure of producing a complete meal from scratch at 6 o'clock after a full day was a genuine and valuable freedom. But cooking was also competence, and craft, and care made tangible, and for women who had built an identity around the excellence of their kitchen, the roast done perfectly, the vegetables bright, the table set with intention. The aluminum tray represented a kind of redundancy that was not entirely comfortable, however convenient. When did we stop seeing the dining table as the heart of the evening? And did that moment begin with a little aluminum tray? It is possible to argue that the TV dinner was not a cause but a symptom. That the American family's relationship with the dinner table was already under pressure from forces larger than a frozen meal, from the expanding television culture, from the entry of women into the workforce, from the suburbanization that separated families from the extended communities where meals had always been communal events shared among neighbors and relatives. The TV dinner arrived into a family structure that was already beginning to change, and it accelerated what was already in motion, which is different from having started it. But it is also possible to argue that the acceleration matters enormously, that the rate of change is itself the change, that a family which might have maintained its dinner table ritual for another decade, slowly adapting to the pressures of the television age, instead crossed a threshold in 1954 or 1958 or 1963. Because the aluminum tray made the crossing so easy, so inexpensive, so cheerfully endorsed by the magazines and the commercials and the box with the television set on its front. The ease of the crossing is part of the story. It was 98 cents. It was 25 minutes. It was a complete meal, hot, requiring nothing of you except the opening of an oven. The 4 compartments of the original TV dinner tray are still recognizable today to anyone who grew up in the era of their dominance. The large space for the main course, the smaller ones for the sides, the geometry of a meal reduced to its components and separated by thin aluminum walls. This geometry became so familiar, so embedded in the body's memory of what dinner could look like, that it shaped, in ways probably unmeasurable, the expectations of an entire generation about the nature of a meal. A meal was a protein and 2 sides. A meal was portions. A meal was something that came in compartments, that could be assessed and consumed by section, that did not require the negotiation of a shared serving dish or the politics of a family platter. A meal was individual, portable, and already arranged. This is perhaps the deepest thing the TV dinner changed, not where families ate or even how often they talked, but the fundamental conception of what a meal was. A meal had been, for most of human history, a communal act, food prepared from shared ingredients and placed in the center of a table for the assembled to take from according to need and preference. The distribution of the food itself, a small daily exercise in the management of a family's internal economy. The passing of the bread, the spooning of the stew, the division of the last piece of chicken, done with the negotiation of people who knew each other well enough to know what fairness looked like between them. These were not ceremonial acts. They were ordinary acts, repeated daily, and their ordinariness was the point. They were how a family practiced being a family, in the small and daily and physical language of shared food. The TV dinner made the meal individual. Each tray was for one person. Each tray was self-contained. There was nothing to pass, nothing to negotiate, nothing to share. Your turkey was yours. My peas are mine. The meal had been privatized. This is not a complaint. It is an observation. The privatization of the meal solved real problems: logistics, labor, time, the accommodation of different appetites and preferences, and the solutions it provided were real solutions. But something was carried in the solution that the people adopting it may not have noticed at the time, in the way that all of us adopt the technologies of our era without fully perceiving what we are adopting along with the convenience. The aluminum tray was a boundary. Clean, efficient, total. It said, "Here is your portion. It is complete. It requires nothing from anyone else at the table. And it offers nothing to anyone else at the table." Eat it, and the transaction is finished. This is a long way from the casserole dish passed hand to hand around the kitchen table, from the serving spoon offered and taken and offered again, from the conversation that happened in the space made by the act of passing food, the brief moment of eye contact, the small exchange, the ordinary maintenance of the relationship that happened between one person and another in the simple physical act of feeding each other. The aluminum tray grew warm in your hands. The pot holder was between your palms and the metal, but the heat came through anyway, a mild, steady warmth that told you, this is real food, this is hot, this is dinner. You carried it from the kitchen to the living room and set it on the TV tray, the floral one or the wood grain one, and the television was already going. The evening news in its measured broadcast voice telling you about the world. And you settled into the sofa or the armchair and balanced the aluminum on the tray's small surface, and the foil was already peeled back, curled to one side. And the steam had gone, and the compartments were open and visible, and the meal was yours. And it was fine. It was often quite good, actually. The fried chicken was good. The Salisbury steak with its pooling gravy was satisfying. The sweet potato was sweet and soft, and exactly what it was supposed to be. The peas were peas, acceptably so. And the apple cobbler in the fourth compartment was, on the right evening, a genuine small pleasure, warm and sweet. Eaten with the last of the fork and followed by the sound of the sitcom's laugh track and the glow of the screen on the aluminum. The tray went in the trash. The TV tray folded up and leaned against the wall. The television continued. The evening moved forward without the clearing of a kitchen table, without the washing of dishes, without the particular quality of quiet that settles over a kitchen after the meal is done, and the family disperses to their separate activities, and the cook stands at the sink with the hot water running and thinks her private thoughts. That particular quality of quiet, the kitchen after dinner, the dishes in the rack, the smell of the food still in the air. This is what was in the compartment that the aluminum tray could not contain. This was the thing that did not fit in the foil cover, that could not be reheated in 25 minutes, that could not be printed on the side of a cardboard box with a television set on its front. The accumulated, daily, unremarkable intimacy of a family that prepared food together and ate it together and cleaned it away together, and did this so regularly and so habitually that the doing of it became the texture of the family's life, the background against which everything else occurred. The texture changed, slowly, then completely. The aluminum tray was light in the hand, and it is heavy in the memory. No one called it a revolution at the time. Everyone who lived through it is its authority now. The microwave oven arrived in American kitchens in the 1970s and 1980s, and accelerated everything the TV dinner had started. The 25 minutes in the oven became 4 minutes on high. The aluminum tray was succeeded by the plastic tray, the cardboard sleeve, the self-venting film, each material innovation, reducing the time and effort between acquisition and eating by another increment. The meal that took an hour to prepare, then 25 minutes, then 4 minutes, eventually became a meal that required no time at all, delivered to the door, already made, needing only to be unboxed. The trajectory that began in 1953 in a Swanson packaging facility in Omaha, when someone looked at an aluminum airline tray and saw a dinner, ended somewhere in the present day in a kitchen where the oven is almost never used, and the refrigerator is full of individual portions from a dozen different services, and the family, whatever form it takes, eats at different times in different rooms from different containers. The aluminum tray is still recognizable in all of this. Its geometry, the main compartment and the sides, the portion sizes, the individual serving, is the geometry of the frozen meal section at every grocery store, and of the restaurant meal packed for delivery, and of the cafeteria tray, and of the children's lunch plate at 1,000 schools. The compartment is everywhere. It became the shape of a meal, and it has never quite stopped being the shape of a meal. Even as the material changed, and the preparation changed, and the context changed beyond any resemblance to a 1963 living room in front of a black and white console television at Carl. Swanson still exists, the brand still on the shelf, the product still in the frozen aisle, recognizable and evolved, and no longer a novelty or an event, but simply part of the landscape of available food. The TV tray still exists in millions of homes, perhaps more now than ever, repurposed for laptops and tablets, and the individual meals of a family that has entirely normalized the arrangement that seemed slightly unusual in 1954. The television has become screens, plural, distributed through every room, available in every pocket, present at every meal. The thing that Swanson put on the box in 1953 as a symbol of modernity is now simply the air everyone breathes. You remember the tray. You remember the foil crinkling back in a curl of silver. You remember the steam and the compartments and the television's glow on the surface of the aluminum and the TV tray clicking open under your meal, and the particular feeling of eating something modern and convenient and slightly strange in a living room that was being remade, evening by evening, into somewhere new. You remember exactly where you were sitting. You remember the quiet. And you never thought about it quite like this before. Do you remember the first TV dinner you ever ate? And whether it felt like a treat or a strange new thing? Did your family still gather at the kitchen table? Or did the TV tray slowly become the evening? And when did we stop seeing the dining table as the center of the evening? Did it begin with a little aluminum tray? Tell us in the comments. We remember it together.